Jaron Namir stepped up to the edge of the nimbus of laser glow. The colors threw stark highlights over his craggy features. Intelligence has located one of our high-value targets, he began. Here, the Hotel Novo Rostov, off Zubovskaya Square. He touched a control and the image blurred, reforming into a series of phantom panes. Several of them showed digital photos of a heavyset man with a beard and thinning hair. This is the mark. Mikhail Kontarsky, a minister of the Russian Federal Assembly and senior administrator of the RFS Committee on Human Augmentation Policy. Saxon raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing. This man is corrupt to the core, Namir went on. He's betrayed his country and the people who elected him. Kontarsky has been suborned by an organization called Juggernaut. What we know of them is this. They are a decentralized anarchist terror group that uses information warfare to further an anti-globalization agenda. Neutralizing Kontarsky is a first step toward eradicating these dangerous militants, and it will deny them a conduit into the Russian Federated States. The Juggernaut name was familiar to Saxon. He recalled intelligence briefings from his time with Bell Tower. One of the targets of the group had been Taiyong Medical, a major client for the PMC's security division. So the Ruskies are incapable of dealing with Kontarsky themselves? Said Hardesty, throwing a look toward Fedorova, who ignored it. Why do we have to intervene? Because the man is a point of instability in a kleptocracy masquerading as a government. Namir paged through more images. Kontarsky is a wild card. He has many friends in the Duma, the parliament. That's why Juggernaut has turned him. He has to be removed. That would mean terminated, Herman asked. If we are being clear? Namir nodded once. Make no mistake, we are dealing with a dangerous man here. Kontarsky is connected to several Russian organized crime syndicates. He's no choir boy. Saxon peered at the screens, catching glimpses of elements from the politician's file, evidence of corruption and money laundering scrolling past his eyes. Mission data is being downloaded to your personal stacks, said Namir. Draw weapons for a covert urban assault from the armory and assemble on the tarmac in 5 minutes for deployment. Saxon followed Herman aft, turning the briefing over in his mind. Taking down a member of the Russian ministry, am I the only one who has questions about that? The German threw him a look. If Kontarsky is a target, I trust the reasons are sound. Do you? Saxon hesitated. You've been with the outfit longer than me. Don't you wonder who gives the orders? Namir gives the orders, Herman said flatly. But who gives them to Namir? The other man walked on. It is not something I trouble myself with, Saxon. Sometimes it is necessary to operate in the shadows to maintain the status quo. That is what we do. But still what? Saxon turned to find Namir standing behind him. Do you need a reason, Ben? Look at Kontarsky's files. He's not an innocent man. Saxon paused, studying the Israeli. Who is? In such close quarters, his thoughts couldn't help but turn again to wondering who would prevail if the two of them faced off. It would be an even match, Saxon thought, at first. Namir glanced over Saxon's shoulder as Herman passed through into the aft compartment, leaving them alone for the moment. Juggernaut is a clear and present danger to global stability. They have to be dealt with. You understand that, yes? I understand that someone is threatened by them, Saxon replied. Taiyong Medical? Others, maybe? It was a clumsy attempt to gauge a reaction, and he knew it, but Namir gave him nothing. Have you ever wondered why Bell Tower's intel during Rainbird was so wrong? The question came out of nowhere, and Saxon blinked. Juggernaut are info-terrorists, Ben. Along with all the other brushfire wars and proxy conflicts they have a hand in, they're working with the Australian Free States, conducting pay-for-play cyber warfare on their behalf, compromising data security, disrupting intelligence gathering, and the men Kontarsky is working with are the ones responsible for your squad dying out there in the desert. Namir paused to let that sink in. Is that reason enough for you? He asked gently. Zubovskaya Square, Moscow, Russian Federated States. The night-black helo circled once over the buildings along Burdenko Street, the ducted rotor rings turning, the sound deadening, baffles humming. The boxy little flyer hugged the angular tops of the offices and apartment blocks, skimming over old tiled roofs, cheek by jowl with modern polyglass domes and sheets of solar paneling. The nose of the craft dipped as Hardesty dropped from the starboard side. Then they were rising up and away, describing a wide circuit around the lines of the plaza at Zubovskaya. Saxon straightened the Kevlar balaclava over his face and peered through his polarized eye shields. Ahead, he could see the roof of the Honovo Rostov. The team had reviewed the deployment on the way from the airport, and they were ready. He took a breath and ran through his own internal checklist, ending it with a last look at the ammo selector on the Hurricane tactical machine pistol that hung from his shoulder strap. The compact submachine gun was all ABS plastic and black anodized steel, the blunt muzzle lost behind a triangular suppressor. 20 seconds. Namir's words came over his mastoid, buzzing in Saxon's skull. The subvocalized radio message had the peculiar echo to it that made encrypted comms sound as if they were being beamed down from space. Saxon frowned. They were cutting it fine. The sun was rising, and the morning light would cost them good cover if they didn't move fast. Then Hardesty spoke over the general channel. "In position," he said. 3 targets. Green light." Namir gave an imperceptible nod. "Execute." Saxon turned to the window in time to see a man on the roof of the Rostov looking up at them, raising a handheld to his ear. In the next second, the man jerked violently backward as if pulled by an invisible wire, a jet of red spurting from his chest. As the helo descended, he spotted the other guards on the roof, collapsing in puffs of pink mist. The helo fell into a hover 10 meters up, and the rest of the tyrants deployed, Barrett and Herman leading, then Namir and Saxon, with Fedorova last. Saxon tensed. He was used to fast roping, but his new high-fall AUG, part of the recruitment package, meant he could drop straight into the thick without a descender cord. The whole thing was counterintuitive, but it worked. He jumped, and a moment before he landed, a brief pulse of electromagnetic energy flared around him, cushioning his fall. He landed squarely, the crackle of the effect generated by the augmentation taking the shock and bleeding it off to nothing. Fedorova put down a heartbeat later, cat-falling with little more than a crunch of gravel. She had her hair back behind an Alice band studded with data loops, but no hood. Fedorova saw him looking and gazed back, languid and unconcerned. With a gust of downwash, the helo powered into the sky. He looked away, scanning the rooftop. The Rostov was a shallow, 3-lobed tower that had been thrown up in the boom years of the early 2010s, but never completed. There were whole floors of the building that were locked off, still unfinished over a decade later. "Blue-green," said Namir, using Barrett and Herman's call signs. "Secure the roof. Check for stragglers." He glanced at Saxon. "Gray, with me." "Roof is clear," Hardesty said from his firing nest across the square. He didn't like the suggestion that he'd missed someone. Low and quick, Saxon followed the tyrant commander toward the boxy service shack in the middle of the roof. He passed the corpse of the man the sniper had shot in the chest and scanned the body. The dead man had a look of frozen surprise on his face, a foam of red froth on his lips. Hardesty's bullet had punctured the heart, the exit wound ripping open the guard's back. The man's face triggered a connection to the mission data Saxon had shunted to a temporary memory store in his implanted neural hub, the modified wet drive bonus from the tyrants. He blinked up an image from an arrest record. The man lying in the pool of crimson was immediately identified as Oleg Pushkin, a minor enforcer with the main Moscow crime syndicate, the Solntsevskaya Bratva. "This guy's a mob hitter," Saxon murmured. "They all are," Namir replied. "Keep up." Barrett was at the service shack as they reached it. Air conditioning equipment, heat exchangers, and cable gear for the Rostov's elevator banks hummed inside. Namir nodded at a secured maintenance hatch on the side of the shack. "Open it." Herman leaned close and used a digital lockpick to neutralize the security latches. When he was done, Barrett stepped in and curled his fingers around the lip of the hatch with a grimace. The bunches of myomer muscles in his arms stiffened, gathered, and then with a low howl of tortured metal, the hatch came away, shearing the bolt heads clean off. As Namir peered inside, Saxon glanced over his shoulder and his brow furrowed in confusion. "Where's Red?" There was no sign of Fedorova anywhere on the rooftop. She had been only a few steps behind him. Barrett chuckled. "She's around." "Green," said Namir. "Deny their communications." "Complying," Herman nodded, drawing a thick disc-shaped object from his backpack. It resembled a landmine. Acting quickly, the German set it on the ground and flicked a yellow and black striped activation switch. A flicker of interference momentarily stuttered across Saxon's cyber optics. "Target comms are dead," reported Barrett, cocking his head like a dog hearing a whistle. "Ready." "Insertion," said Namir. "Go." One after another, they threaded in through the torn-out hatch and into the massive machinery crowding the interior of the service shack. Inside, a triangular cluster of running gear fell away into a series of shafts that ran the length of the Rostov, down to the basement parking levels 16 stories below. Saxon toggled his optics to low-light mode, and the space became visible in shades of green and white. The shapes of elevator cars were visible, most of them static, others gently rising or descending. Namir and Saxon took point, working their way down past the slowly turning drums of support cables and the rumbling lift gears. According to their information, Kontarsky and his people were on floor 13. Outside, the pilot of the helo was watching the windows of the apartments on the 13th floor, scanning through the vision-opaque glass with a thermographic sensor, watching the body heat traces of the minister and his staff. At this time of day, most of them were asleep. Only the guards were supposed to be awake. They had to take care, though. Their intel wasn't clear on how many, if any, civilians were in the building. Collateral damage was to be kept to an absolute minimum. Securing nylon cords to the cable frames, the two of them fast roped down in silence, pausing at each level to sweep for magnetic anomaly detectors or beam sensors. Saxon watched Namir work with speed and delicacy, rendering security systems inert with the skill of a veteran. The central lift of a 3-block cluster was locked in place at the 13th. The plan was to enter through its roof and fan out along the 3 radial corridors. Namir, Herman, and Saxon taking one each, Barrett holding the core as backup. "Prep for breach," Namir sub-vocalized. Saxon lowered himself to the top of the elevator car, disconnected his tether, and drew out a pressurized canister of DET foam. Dialing the nozzle to narrow feed, he put marble-sized blobs of the khaki-toned chemical in the corners of the car's roof, then thumbed a set of slaved micro-detonators into the congealing foam. As he finished, he felt the elevator move slightly beneath him and heard voices. 3 men speaking in Russian. Through an air vent, he could see a sliver of what was going on. "Что случилось?" said one of them. He was tapping the radio headset at his ear, frowning. Another man, out of Saxon's sightline, spat in irritation and followed his cohort into the lift. They were leaving their posts. Herman's trick with the communications blackout had spooked them. Then the man with the radio gave a slow, owlish blink. Saxon recognized the action. He had implanted optics. He was changing vision modes. The guard looked up, and for a fraction of a second, Saxon saw a bluish glitter in his right eye. The tell gave away exactly what kind of optic the guard was using. A terahertz lens that could see right through light cover. In the next few seconds, everything happened with bullet-fast rapidity. The guard swore explosively and slammed his fist into the control pad, sending the elevator into an express plunge to the lobby. The other men in the car dragged their guns up, but they were armed with cut-down assault rifles, and inside the close confines of the elevator, the size of the guns made them unwieldy. Saxon held tight to the car's frame and felt his stomach turn over as the lift dropped away. In the next breath, the guards would have a bead on him. A spray of blind fire and he would be ripped to shreds. He cursed and did the only thing he could, tapping the detonator key on the control bracelet around his wrist. The blobs of DET foam combusted with sharp, smoky reports, and the roof of the elevator car collapsed inward, Saxon falling with it. The noise deafened him. The confined space became chaotic. The guards cursed and struggled to deflect the debris, lashing out. Saxon had no time to draw a weapon. It was like fighting inside a coffin, with no room to maneuver. Nothing to do but strike fast and give no quarter. He punched the man with the T-wave optic into the wall, and the guard's rifle snarled, discharging a 3-round burst into the door. Then, spinning in place, Saxon drove the armor-plated pad on his elbow into the rib cage of the second guard. He shoved him into a thin screen along the back wall, and it fractured, webbing with cracks. The third guard was still struggling with his rifle, shouldering aside the remains of a collapsed lighting rig. He launched himself at Saxon and slammed the frame of the weapon into his face, cracking his eye shields. The soldier hit back with a punch from his augmented arm and connected with the guard's ribs. Bones fractured with a sickening crunch, and the assailant staggered backward, wheezing. Then, all three of them attacked him at once, using their guns like clubs to beat him about the head and shoulders. Saxon felt an impact at the base of his spine, and he stumbled, losing his balance as the elevator continued to drop toward the ground floor. He had no doubts that the guards had reinforcements waiting there. He had to finish this quickly. Locking his legs, Saxon pivoted and let his reflex booster implant ramp up to full. His nerves jangled with the sudden new input, the influence of the neuromuscular accelerator coursing through him. The guards were crowding in, and he struck out once more. The man with the cracked ribs went back into the doors, slammed into place by the torso of the first guard. Saxon fired a low, fast kick at the leg of the other man and was rewarded with a pain-filled yelp. Natural bone broke easily under the turned steel of a heavy augmentation. The giddy rush of speed made Saxon's skin prickle. He felt heat wash over him, and in a moment of sudden, shocking scent memory, he smelled aviation fuel and smoke. The crackle of the fires around the crashed VTOL were abruptly there in the front of his thoughts, the horrible tearing noise as Sam died in front of him. Fury spread through Saxon like a wave, and he went in for the kill. The throat of the fallen guard he crushed with a brutal, stabbing blow from his cyber arm. Then he pulled a broken piece of roof support up from where it had landed and used it to beat the next of the guards bloody. The last man, who fought back as he coughed and spat, struck out with a cyber hand that sprouted a fan of blades. Saxon took a cut across his cheek, but the pain seemed distant, edited from the moment. He took the guard's arm, a spindly model sheathed in pink, flesh-toned plastic, doubtless Federal Army surplus, and bent it back against the joint, fracturing the casing. The guard tried to struggle free, but Saxon took a clump of his hair and beat his head into the walls until he fell. The elevator chimed, and Saxon let the guard's body go, allowing it to fall out and onto the dusty marble floor of the lobby. 3 more men were waiting for him, standing in a semicircle around the elevator bank, each with a heavy caliber automatic raised and aimed. The data feed from the wet drive helpfully told him that these men were also members of the Bratva, each with a lengthy police record, but the tips of the prison tattoos that emerged from the open collars of their shirts made that clear enough. Saxon slowly raised his hands, panting, the moment of animal fury he had felt in the elevator fading as fast as it had come. For a few seconds there, he had become lost, absorbed in rage-fueled guilt over Sam, Kano, and all the others. The edges of the dark anger he had first felt in the field hospital boiled inside him. He knew enough Russian to understand that the men with guns wanted him to kneel down. Carefully, he did what they asked, biding his time. One of them would have to come close enough to take the hurricane from him, and then, if there was a chance, something shimmered like oil on water in the corner of Saxon's vision, and he turned toward it in time to see a shape emerge out of the air, a glassy, swift figure blurred by motion, abruptly becoming solid, real. The military called it mimeoptical active camouflage. Saxon wasn't up on the full technical specs for the augmentation, but from what he knew, the system used a matrix of molecule-thin induction wires implanted beneath the epidermis and across cyberlimb plating that, when activated, generated a local electromagnetic field that could render a human being into a walking stealth weapon. It was prohibitively expensive and delicate under battlefield conditions, and difficulties with the human augmentation interface meant that it was rarely deployed in combat. Full synchrony between the user and the system was hard to achieve. To use it well, you had to be someone with a near-pathological focus of will. The ghost figure became Fedorova, and she killed the first man with a slashing knife cut to the throat, dispatching the other 2 with quick, silenced bursts from her machine pistol. She trembled slightly as the camouflage effect bled away, the focused EM field dissipating. Fedorova looked across at him as he stood up, her scalp beaded with sweat. And then she smiled. "Go tactical," ordered Namir. The elevator doors came off their mountings in a screech of torn steel, and Barrett swung out behind them, snorting with effort. He dealt with the guard closest to him with a savage backhand punch that drove bone shards up into the man's forebrain. The guard dropped to the unfinished concrete floor, twitching as he died. Namir and Herman came in a heartbeat later, their machine pistols snarling. Armor-piercing rounds sprayed in fans, taking more kills. One of the guards was still alive, and he stumbled toward a side corridor, bleeding heavily. The German was on him in a moment, and with a haymaker punch from his armored fist, he crushed the man's skull with a single blow. "Move," snarled the commander. The mission was entering its full active phase. Now speed, not stealth, was of the essence. Namir glanced around, his eyes narrowing. The 13th floor did not match the spy photos captured by the intelligence sources of his patrons. Instead of fitted deep pile carpets and bright walls patterned with subtle murals, the surroundings were bare and undecorated. The floor had the dusty scent of old concrete and ozone. Where mahogany doors should have led the way to opulent suites and apartments, there were yawning open frames walled off by ragged sheets of industrial polythene. Herman gave him a quizzical look. "This is not right." "No," admitted Namir. "Proceed and stay alert." "Company," snapped Barrett, raising his arm. A group of 4 more thugs sprinted into view from along one of the radial corridors, each of them armed with a heavy rifle. "Take them," said Namir. Barrett's right arm came apart on expanding frames, the plating folding back, the hand turning aside to allow the mechanism within to emerge. He tugged an ammunition belt from a hopper in his backpack, swiftly slotting it into the feed maw on the base of the reconfigured limb. From the wrist emerged the triple-head barrel of a minigun. The muzzles spun into a blur, and with a sound like the buzz of a heavy electric generator, the cyberweapon ejected a gout of yellow fire and a storm of bullets. Grinning, Barrett panned the cannon across the corridor, ripping through the flimsy flakboard the guards used for cover, tearing into them, blowing craters in the surface of the unfinished concrete. "Advance! Kontarsky's rooms are just ahead." Namir surged forward, and the others went with him. Reaching the space where the grand suite should have been, the Israeli reached up and tore aside a curtain of plastic. Inside there was only another echoing, half-built space. Festoons of cables hung from the ceiling or snaked across the floor from drum-like power cells. The room was hotter than the corridor outside, blood-warm and dry. "What the hell?" Barrett scanned the room, his scarred face souring. "This is the wrong goddamn place. He's not here. Nobody is here." "Negative," insisted Herman. "This is the correct location. Kontarsky should be in this room. We saw the thermographic scans." "Why would 6 men guard nothing?" Namir demanded. He stalked across the open space, his footfalls echoing. Something about the dimensions of the room seemed off. In front of the windows that looked out onto the Moscow dawn, there were long, glassy panes arranged in a barrier, running wall to wall and floor to ceiling. The power cords ran to connectors, and as Namir came close, he felt a steady surge of warmth radiating from them. "White," he said to the air. "Go to thermal. Target the 13th floor. Tell me what you see." "I have 3 unit indicators," came the reply from the sniper. "Silver, blue, green, multiple unidentified targets, same location." He paused, a note of confusion entering his tone. "You're in the room with them." "No," Namir growled, reaching down to grab a bunch of the cables. "We are not." He gave the cables a violent yank, and they tore free from the glass, spitting sparks. The glass panes shimmered and went transparent as power bled out of them. Hardesty's gasp of surprise was transmitted over the open channel. "What the hell? Silver, all unidentified targets have vanished. Repeat, vanished." "They were never here," Herman said aloud. "The panels. They were some form of thermal blind, projecting a decoy image." "Real smart," muttered Barrett. "So where is this creep really hiding out?" "Find him," demanded Namir. Saxon nodded distractedly and glanced around the marble lobby. It was gloomy in here, the only light a weak morning glow through the fan-shaped windows above the high front doors. Aside from Fedorova, the area was deserted. He glanced back to find the Russian woman down on one knee, rifling through the pockets of one of the men she had just killed. A gasp escaped the guard's mouth as she turned him over, a last breath leaving his lungs as she shifted the body. If the target's not on 13, then he's got to be on a different floor, shielded from thermographic scan," Saxon gave voice to his thoughts, following them through. He cast around the lobby. There are multiple lift shafts. One of these has to be a dedicated express elevator. Here. He found a single set of doors off to one side, in a discreet alcove. Everything about the positioning of it screamed restricted access. "Use it," Namir ordered. "We'll track your locators, vector to you." There's no call button here, he noted, finding a glass panel set in the wall. It may need some kind of key or maybe palm print recognition. A heavy, wet crunch sounded behind him, and a blade edge clanked against the marble. Then Fedorova was sprinting to his side. In her fingers, she carried something fleshy that left a trail of red droplets all across the tiled checkerboard floor. Never mind, Saxon reported as she pressed a severed hand into the panel. Red has, improvised. The elevator gave a hollow chime and opened itself to them. It let them out on 10, right in the line of fire from a pair of security-grade box guards. The machines were steel cubes the size of a washing machine, inert in a monitoring mode. But when their sensors detected something that did not match their programmed security protocols, the mechanisms unfolded like a complex puzzle, extruding weapon muzzles and targeting scopes. They were the smaller cousins of the large vehicle-size versions deployed by the military or law enforcement, but they could still be lethal. Saxon rolled out into the lavish corridor, bringing up his machine pistol as he moved. Fedorova launched herself from the elevator car on those racehorse legs of hers, so fast she was almost a blur of motion. The box guards dithered, the simple machine brains of the basic robots hesitating over which target to attack. Saxon used the moment to his advantage, coming up in half cover behind a cockpit leather armchair. He aimed with the Hurricane and squeezed the trigger, marching a clip of armor-piercing rounds up the frame of the closest box guard, ripping it open. It stumbled into a wall and collapsed. Fedorova was on top of her target, and she took off the machine's primary sensor head with a spinning crescent kick. The robot reeled, and the dark-skinned woman rammed the muzzle of her machine pistol into a gap between its armor plates and fired point blank. 10th floor, Saxon reported. We're splitting up to search for the target. He looked toward Fedorova, who gave him a curt nod and set off down the southern corridor. Copy, Gray, said Namir. We're coming to you. Isolate and neutralize. Saxon chose the northwest arm of the Y-shaped corridor and moved forward, low and fast, from cover to cover. Something moved ahead of him, and he saw a squat, thick-set shape roll out from a shadowed alcove. It was an ornate machine, plated with steel and sheathed with ceramic detailing, an elegant hotel service robot modeled on some arcane, pre-20th century artistic ideal of what an automaton should be. It moved on fat gray tires, turning like a tall tank. A speaker grill presented itself to Saxon and spoke in Russian, then Farsi, and finally English. This area is off limits to guests, it declared. Proceed no farther. A fan of green laser light issued out and scanned the hallway, catching Saxon by surprise. The machine caught sight of his drawn weapon and reacted instantly. Ceramic panels opened up to allow the vanes of a pulsed energy projector to emerge. Mandatory warning delivered, it said. Deploying deterrent. A throbbing wavefront of force hummed from the robot and blasted down the corridor. Saxon went down as the pulse threw freestanding tables and flower vases into the air with the force of the discharge. The rush of the knockdown effect was powerful, like the undertow in an ocean wave. He leapt from where he had landed, firing as he went. Bullets sparked off metal and inlaid wood, marring the elegantly worked surface of the machine. It fired again, dislodging pictures from the walls, blasting open the doors to empty rooms. Saxon's free hand closed around a cylindrical object on his gear vest, and he tugged it free with a jerk of the wrist. By feel alone, he found the primer tab and pulled it. The weapon buzzed in response, and Saxon threw it hard, diving for cover behind a damaged door. The Type 4 Frag K grenade clanked off the casing of the robot and bounced to the carpet beneath it. A moment later, the explosive core detonated, blasting the machine off its supports and into a smoking heap. Bursting from cover, Saxon raced through the cloud of cordite smoke and the humming afternote of the explosion. He took down the door to the corner suite with a kick from the heel of his tactical boot and pushed through, leading with the Hurricane. Inside, the room was wide and devoid of angles, all soft furnishings and bowed windows. A thick layer of metallized plastic sheet, doubtless some kind of sensor baffle, coated the window glass, bleeding out all the color and warmth of the dawn rising over Zubovskaya Square. Saxon found the power feed for the baffle and disconnected it. Off to one side, folding panels opened out into a range of rooms bigger than the house Saxon had grown up in. On the other side of the suite, a second bedroom had been gutted to accommodate the racks of a compact server farm. an orchard of data monitors, and a complex virtual keyboard. A man in a dark jacket rushed Saxon from a doorway leading to the bathroom, the lethally compact shape of a Widowmaker shotgun in his hands. The machine pistol in Saxon's ready grip chattered, and the thug took the burst in the chest, crashing backward onto the tiles in a welter of blood. He ejected the clip, slammed a fresh load into place, and crossed into the bedroom. Mikhail Kontarsky, his face lit by sheer animal panic, recoiled from the keyboard console and fumbled for a nickel-plated heavy-frame automatic pistol lying on top of one of the server pods. Saxon brought up the muzzle of the Hurricane and aimed it at Kontarsky's chest. "Don't," he told him. The Russian wasn't the man he'd seen in the briefing picture anymore. That grim face and distant gaze were gone, replaced by raw terror. He gave a brittle nod and held his hands to his chest. "Please," he began, his voice heavily accented, "you must not stop me." Something in Saxon's peripheral vision shimmered, and he realized that beneath the panes of complex, scrolling data on the screens, there was a recognizable shape, the ghost image of a human face, peering out through layers of static. "He's here to kill you, Mikhail," it said. The voice was toneless, sexless, flattened into a brittle machine timbre that was utterly anonymous. The only thing that could be considered any kind of identity was a data tag showing a name, Janice. "You told me I would have more time." Kontarsky spat, his lips trembling. He gave Saxon a pleading stare. "Please, I have to finish what I started," or Saxon took a warning step forward. "Touch that console and it will be the last thing you ever do, Minister." "Mikhail," said the video-masked figure. "This is bigger than you. We need the data on the killing floor. You must complete the upload." Saxon sneered and put a burst of rounds through the big screen, silencing the voice. Kontarsky howled and stumbled backward. "Enough of your pal." He grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him forward, propelling him out of the room. "No." There were a dozen other monitors in the gutted bedroom and screens in the main part of the suite. Each one flickered into life, repeating the image of the static shrouded face. The word repeated over and over as each one activated. "No, not yet." "It's over," Saxon told him, ignoring the voice. A flash of resentment and defiance crossed Kontarsky's face, and he struggled in Saxon's grip. "You're not here to arrest me. You're not a policeman. What authority do you have?" The moment passed just as quickly as the man's eyes fell to the machine pistol. "Please, I beg of you, do not kill me. I only did what I thought was right." "He is not a criminal," insisted the voice. "You cannot judge him." Saxon's jaw stiffened. "You're part of a global terror network," he spat. "You're part of Juggernaut, and the people you sold out to are responsible for the deaths of my men." The anger was coming back, and he felt the burn of it. "Operation Rainbird." He snarled the words at the cowering man. "You know that name? You know what happened out there? They were soldiers doing their jobs. It wasn't even their damn war." Saxon clubbed Kontarsky with the butt of the gun and sent him stumbling into the door frame. "Now move. I'm taking you alive. You can answer for what you've done." He glared at one of the screens. "Are you watching this? Because we're coming for you next." No. That's not true," Kontarsky stammered, turning to the monitor. "Please, Janice." He implored the video ghost. "Help me." But the image's attention was on Saxon. "Do you know what you're doing, mercenary?" He thought he detected a faint edge of reproach in the words. "Do you know what master you serve?" The question made Saxon hesitate, and he shot Kontarsky a hard look, hauling him up to his feet, pushing him forward into the middle of the room. The man staring back at him was pale with fear, his eyes betraying no duplicity, no deception. "I don't know anything about your men," he whispered. "You must believe me." And for a moment Saxon did. He was a good judge of liars. He'd met enough of them in combat and elsewhere, and he knew the look of a man too afraid to lie. And if Rainbird meant nothing to him, then... Green light. Saxon heard the voice over the general comm channel a split second before the plastic-coated window crackled with fractures. Hardesty's bullet entered Kontarsky's head through the nasal cavity, blasting bone and brain matter across the wood-paneled walls. His body fell, jetting red, collapsing across a rosewood table. When Saxon looked up again, all the screens were dark.